Awesome. Okay. So just so everybody realizes, we're recording today, and I'm very, very excited. I'm going to welcome you all to this Quorum Initiative speaker series on navigating your career path to future board membership. This has been a topic that's held a lot of interest to our community, and we're very, very excited and appreciative to have Patricia Browne, who's the CEO of P. Browne and Associates, as well as Amy Mertz-Browne, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Compliance and Privacy Officer for BECU. Amy's going to give a better introduction of each of our speakers, but I just want to let you know that. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you are not speaking, we would ask that you mute yourself. If you have any questions, you can drop them into the chat function, but also at the end, there'll be some time for questions as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this session over to Amy Browne. And again, thank you both to Amy and Patricia. This is very exciting.
I just realized I was on mute. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm really excited to be here and be on this panel with Patricia. Just a little bit about me. I've been a Quorum member for several years now. I think like 5 or 6. And I am I have been on a couple of boards, but they've all been nonprofit boards. I believe Patricia, same thing, been on a couple of boards, currently a member of the Alumni Council board for Johns Hopkins University, and also was on the board of the National Children's Center. And I think Patricia will be talking a little bit about that because she turned that into a job, which was pretty cool. So, you know, we've both got quite a bit of experience with nonprofit. Neither of us have been on a for-profit board yet, but that's something that both of us have in our ambition. And so we can certainly talk about that. I believe we're both members also, or have been in the past, members of the National Association of Corporate Directors, which is a trade association that is focused on primarily on public company board leadership. And people join that to either become just more cognizant of board membership and what that looks like, or to get training and things like that. So I think, Patricia, you're a certified, did you ever go through the certification?
Board governance fellow.
Board governance fellow. So yeah, which is really, really amazing. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. And so excited to be here. So we thought it might be useful to start with just understanding what is the responsibility of a board of directors of any organization. And so, Patricia, would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I'd love to. There's a little bit of a difference between nonprofit and for-profit, but in general, it's oversight. And sometimes it can become a very fuzzy line because board of directors will want to get deep in the trenches with the staff, but that's really not the role. It's oversight to be sure that the proper policies and procedures are in place, that finances are being managed appropriately. And then for nonprofits, fundraising is key. My very first board, I joined because of the corporation that I worked for. They supported the organization. And as a result, there was a board membership opportunity and I filled that slot. We did activities, but fundraising was not as critical. But today's environment, fundraising and being an ambassador for the organization is very, very important.
And there's also, particularly with private companies or public companies, there's a fiduciary relationship.
Yes,
and that's a
absolutely.
responsibility, right? And that can be kind of scary, and some people are not interested in that.
Risk management, yes, audits, all of those things is more bottom line driven. But with the for-profit, well, really with both for-profit and nonprofit, there are concerns about uh, litigation, potential litigation. You've had all kinds of corporate scandals that have taken place because there was not the proper oversight. So you're absolutely right. And some people do shy away from that. I know we had extra insurance for our board members just in case something would come up, but it's especially critical in the for-profit world.
Right. So, and I've heard a tip provided that if you ever are going to look at a corporate board, whether it's a private company, a startup, whatever stage of growth that company is, that you've got to have be the beneficiary of corporate officers and directors insurance,
Absolutely.
so that you don't
Absolutely.
have to defend yourself in a lawsuit if there ever is one. And I also I had heard I think at an NACD summit that they called the public board's primary job is to like monitor the CEO and
Mhm.
fire the CEO if if he or she is not doing what they should be doing.
Right.
And then on a nonprofit board, you really don't have that ability because that's not the role. So if you really had a super big problem with how the head of the the actual administrative head of the nonprofit, probably your only recourse is just to resign from the board. You couldn't force the president out, but legally in any way.
Well, the board is the nonprofit leader's boss. So there's a little bit that can happen there. But you're right, it is very delicate. But when you think about the oversight, if you have a leader that is not doing the appropriate things, you need to engage counsel to make sure that you're following the appropriate steps. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of oversight there because I always saw it's interesting though, because the board is my boss, but I recruited for my board.
Right. So
So
I put all my friends and relations on there, my country club friends or whoever else. Yeah.
well, that's
Right.
dangerous because you don't want to lose friends. Yeah, so you really want to look at what the skill gaps are in your board members, what are the initiatives that you're trying to launch in the organization, and what could you benefit from in terms of skill set from new board members?
Right. Right. So that kind of segues into the other topic we were going to cover, which is what could people be doing at different stages in their career, mid-career, later career, to prepare themselves to be attractive as a board member, and skills, experiences, and things, kind of building off of what you just talked about, Patricia, about what do boards need, and that can change over time too, right?
Yeah, it really does depend on the initiatives and the need of the board. At one point, I was looking for architects as subject matter experts to give us support because we were looking to totally renovate one of our properties. And that's not an expertise that we have on staff. And having that expertise on the board really helps us to move forward, helps us in selecting the right people to do the work. So really every skill set is a possibility. Most nonprofits are looking for people that are decision makers in the organization because they generally have access to more dollars, especially if you're looking for corporate partners. But in terms of skill set and preparation, I think there's an opportunity for everything. So oftentimes I would look for people that were able to give, but sometimes doers were just as important to help us to get the work done because the people that our decision makers don't always have the extra time. When I need people to go out with me to meet with a potential donor, to go out to events to help carry the message. So I think volunteering is always an opportunity, and you don't have to be at a particular level in your career.
Mhm.
Depending on the organization, there are lots of nonprofits that are starving for professional expertise in a number of areas.
Like operational areas and things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Human resources, marketing, legal, for employee relations especially. Half of our staff was union, so bargaining union experience. Um, Everything comes into play, and just the love for the work. We
Hmm.
had members who had family members that had intellectual and developmental disabilities, so they had a true passion for the work, and that's important as well.
This is at the
At
National
the National Children's Center.
Children's Center, right? Which is, you were talking about the that being a nonprofit board, right?
Hmm.
And for-profit boards, again, neither Patricia nor I have been on one yet, but I have certainly, we've both been through a lot of training and listening about what those boards are looking for. And um, many of them, well, every public company board has to have an audit committee. So they need people with financial experience,
Hmm.
auditing experience, things of that nature. So that's kind of like an always have to have piece on the board. So if you just happen to have that expertise, then you're going to be very attractive to most public or even private company boards. Um, CFO kind of experience is also related to that.
Absolutely.
But that,
Governance is
yeah,
huge.
governance. But I also have heard that, if you don't have that, doesn't mean that you wouldn't ever be eligible or attractive to be selected for a for-profit board. It sometimes it depends on the company and what the nature of their business is, right, Patricia? Like
Hmm.
if it's a manufacturing company or a startup company in a consumer product and service kind of business, they might need operational kind of expertise.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think nonprofit or for profit, and even looking for employment, networking is everything. Because for the for-profit boards, they often pick from their inner circles and people that are referred. It's kind of a club of sorts. But for nonprofit, it's the same thing. Referrals are always the best source. And you probably find in hiring people, referrals make the best employees. There's a lot of anxiety because you bring someone on the board and they're really not the right fit. They look great on paper, and then you got to figure out how you get rid of them. So networking, I think, is critical. So a nice nonprofit board that has corporate members on it, you get to know people, work closely with them, you can express your interest, and I think that's probably a better way to get in as opposed to going through an application process. I think you get lost. There's also the opportunity to look at executive headhunters, like Corn Ferry. They recruit for board members, both on the nonprofit and the corporate space. But I think networking and getting to know people in organizations that you're interested in, definitely is the best route to go.
Yeah, I have heard at least two stories now out of many, many stories. So don't take this as a, statistically significant sample, but sometimes it's really interesting to hear the story about how do people get on a corporate board? Like how did they get there? And I've heard at least two stories related to what you talked about just now, Patricia. One was they met a corporate person on a nonprofit board, like a kind of like a larger one, like a United Way
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
one of
Hmm.
those, because a lot of
Hmm.
companies like to have their executives be on a board like that because it looks
Exactly.
good for the company and
Hmm.
all that.
Hmm.
So they met a corporate decision maker, and then they got on the board of that, somebody that person knew. It
Exactly.
wasn't their company, but it was like, it again, you're in that person's network because they
Right.
know you, they've seen you. And the other one was actually somebody who had volunteered on a county commission type thing, same kind of thing, where people from corporate America were on that commission because they cared because their
Hmm.
business
Hmm.
was impacted or related. And again, it was usually not like you get on that person's board, but it was like a connection to a connection because it's
Right.
within the network. So you're just expanding your network by a whole nother a person's whole other network that you would never otherwise interact with, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, those are two examples that really struck home to me.
Right.
um
And the nonprofit board oftentimes can be the grooming place to prepare for the corporate board. So you work with a lot of nonprofit boards, you work governance, you hold offices, you build your muscle, and that gives you more to add to your resume when you start looking at the for-profit boards. But we had Sheila Johnson, who is a former co-owner of BET, who owns or manages several Five Diamond resorts around the world, who's a co-owner in a sports team. We had her as a speaker and we asked her about for-profit boards. She's never been on one. She's never been asked to be on one. She's hinted at becoming a member. They weren't interested. And she talked about this club or this circle of friends, this network. And if you're not in that network, sometimes it's hard to break through. So I think who you know and how you follow around different people and work with different people makes all the difference in the world. In the early days of my career, I would always volunteer when I knew corporate people were coming to town for different events that we were having. And it was so that I could get to know people outside of my initial circle, my immediate circle. And it made a difference because when it was time to apply for other areas and then move up, I had those connections. And I think the same thing happens with boards. And Amy mentioned my last position as a CEO. I was asked by a colleague if I would be interested in joining the board of directors. The board was a tad bit dysfunctional. They needed strategy, they needed marketing, and she asked if I would be interested. So I joined the board, and 2 years in, the CEO decided that he wanted to recruit a COO. And so he gave us the job description and he asked us to take a look if we knew anyone. Again, he was looking for referrals. So as a good networking person, I started looking through my contacts. Who do I know in the nonprofit space? Well, I really didn't know anyone because all of my time was in the corporate space, but I had just finished my MBA at Hopkins and I started looking at the job description and I said, I think I could do that. And so I stepped off the board and I applied for the job. And after some time, I was offered the position as the chief operating officer. Coolest thing I had ever done because I got a chance to blend my corporate skills, my recent MBA training into this role. And I could really enjoy and follow my passion. And it was now my career. When the CEO decided to retire, he says, you know, the board wants you to take the job. Oh no, I don't want to be a CEO. That was never in my bucket list. You stay, I'll support you, I'll do all the work, but I don't want to be a CEO. They always say you don't know what you want if you've never done it. Best thing I could have done is taking on that role. And it really was about my passion and my passion actually became a career. So it was a very cool experience. So again, volunteering, you get in front of people that you may not necessarily meet otherwise, and you don't know where it might lead.
Yeah. One of the things that you really touch on in that wonderful story too is the synergy between board service and corporate service or corporate leadership.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to a session at one of the NACD events, and one of the panels were about how CEOs work with their boards, and how boards can support a CEO. And there was a CEO that was talking and became so vulnerable about how hard it is to be a CEO and how lonely it is, and how how he worked with different board members to kind of just talk one-on-one because he just needed a sounding board.
Mhm.
And he really didn't have time to talk to a lot of other CEOs because he was being busy being a CEO. And
Mhm.
it really highlighted to me the ability, and one of the coolest things that I find about looking into board service, even if you never get on a corporate board, is that it helps you understand business better. And
Absolutely.
so you can bring those skills back to your own business, your own corporate career. And actually, the CEO of our current my company now is on a for-profit board, and she talked about that when I was talking to her about her board service. She said, "I have learned how to be a better CEO because I'm helping oversee another company's
Mhm.
CEO."
Mhm.
So, and I think that works at all levels, not just CEO level, right?
You're
So that's
absolutely right.
another great thing about just being here and learning about board service and going to trainings and whatever. It's just helping you be a better corporate operator also.
Yeah, because you're around other leaders and you're not in a space that's competitive. Because so you can get in a networking group of peers, and if there's just a little bit of competition, they're only going to share so much. But in board service, they're all in different walks of life, and you can just talk and you hear. And sometimes it's just refreshing to know that the problems that you're experiencing aren't unique to you.
Right.
Misery loves company, right? So it's good to hear that it's not you, it's really more indicative of the role and what's involved there. So you're
Right.
absolutely right.
And just how other people solve approach problems and solve problems, right?
Hmm.
So this might be a good time to talk a little bit about the resources people could tap into to learn more about this if they are just learning or just starting. They're kind of looking into board service. We talked about peer groups, but what other ways could people learn more about this if their interest has been piqued with
So
this?
one of my favorites is Harvard Business Review. Excellent, excellent publication. You can join and get the magazines, and they often have articles around board effectiveness, around trends and industries that you need to focus on. Board Source is a great organization. It's much like NACD, but it's focused on nonprofit leadership, and they do webinars and trainings and certifications. And even LinkedIn has some trainings that you can take that will also give you support in terms of building your muscle, so to speak, for the opportunities that may arise.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of times I have heard this question asked. I've asked it myself, particularly NACD, it being for public company board service. They offer an expensive kind of certification program,
Yes.
and people, I've heard this question asked so many times, and to different speakers through chief or people that are in the space of networking or headhunting for board service. And the consistent answer that I've heard is that it's not a qualifying thing. The people that are looking for the people to serve on boards are not saying, "Oh, does Patricia have this NACD certification? And if she
Right,
doesn't,
not at
I'm
all.
not
Yeah.
interested." It isn't about that. It's really about the networking. But these certification and education programs are really more for you to
Hmm.
to just to learn, to work better with your board. If you're in a corporate position and you work with a board all the time, like I do now, like that's challenging, right? How do I
Right.
work with the board? Let me go to a board training so I can learn what they think they're doing. And so I
Right.
can try to tap into that better. Or just learning about business, or I want to build my own confidence to be able to be ready if I ever
Hmm.
get an opportunity.
Hmm.
Those are all great reasons to do the trainings,
Hmm.
and maybe to get some networking. But
Hmm.
I have found even with the NACD summit and things, you're really networking with other people who want to be on a board. They're
Right.
not already
Right.
on a board. So
Yeah, there was always a session for women, especially on how to get on a corporate board. So they would work with you on resume preparation, tell you good books to use, talk about people like Corn Ferry to affiliate yourself with, it's like this mystery that we haven't
Yeah.
quite solved because women are still in the minority when it comes to corporate boards, even though we're fabulous once we get there. But I really believe that networking is key. Now, I actually enrolled my entire board with NACD,
Oh, good.
and
Great.
we actually use their training to help improve the governance, the role clarity, the functions for audit and all the different committees. It was extremely helpful, a little pricey, but it was worth it because it actually helped me to turn the board around, which also helped to turn the work of the organization around. Board Source, very similar, just nonprofit, not quite as glitzy as NACD. We had amazing speakers at NACD. So it really was inspirational for you
Hmm.
personally in your career, in addition to looking at potential board service.
Right. And then there's also private directors association that for private companies, because that's a whole different segment of types of
Mm-hmm.
boards.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was something in the chat. I'm just kind of briefly skimming. There are a lot of networking groups that some of which you have to pay to join that
Yes.
are supposed to be helping you find board sources. There's a couple that are a little bit of a scammer kind of situation. And I don't think that most of those are, again, going to lead you to board positions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another tool to learn more and to try to learn about different business types that you might be interested in pursuing. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's you could do a lot of that on your own also. You
Right.
don't have to pay to do this, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, so I just kind of caution that a little bit that if people want a big chunk of money up front, just be cautious about that.
Exactly, exactly. The one, just like the people that email you and say, "Oh, you've been selected as the CEO of the year." It's like, who are you? And it comes with a fee.
In order to be in the
And
magazine, you have
yeah,
to
and
give us
nobody reads the
20,000.
magazine. So yeah, absolutely. Um, so I see someone's asking advice for a company looking to establish a board. I think the first thing that you need to do is think about what it is that you want the board to assist you with. And again, look at the initiatives of that organization and then look for people that have the skill sets to help drive those areas that you're trying to grow in. I would suggest starting small because as the CEO, you're managing the board and you're managing the business, even though the board is your boss. Very interesting dynamic. But if it's too big, it can be really a really challenging. I actually had a staff member that I assigned just to be the liaison with the board
Yeah,
because board members can sometimes be needy. Um, so I would start small. And even, in your personal career, I tell people you should have your own board of directors, not your friends that will tell you what you want to hear, but you want people that will hold you accountable, that will help guide you in the right direction, that will give you good information and good advice that you can be vulnerable with. My board chair and my legal person on the board, we talked the legal person, we may have talked once a week. There's always something that's arising, and it's good to have that partner that can give you guidance and keep you out of trouble.
right.
So I would look at what are the needs of the organization, what are the competencies, and then look for people that have that skill set that can support you. And for you that want to join a board, think about what your values are, think about your passion, because it's an excellent opportunity for you to give back. So it's not just about navigating your career, but it also can really just make you feel better. Like my job as the CEO of the National Children's Center, I told people it was more of a ministry than a job because a lot of my values were aligned with the work and the mission of the organization. So you want to make sure you have that right. Don't just say yes to any organization, because you can't be an ambassador for that organization. You can't be the spokesperson. You can't be the networker if you're just there to check off a box.
Yeah, and that's for a corporate board too. I
Absolutely.
know one of my peers through Chief told a story about getting appointed to a corporate board. It was a relatively small company. She had the same experience as everybody else on the board, but she was the only woman. And she got there and she found that the dynamic on that board was so intolerable to her, that she just was like, oh my God, I made a horrible mistake. I need to get out of here. Cause she was just like, I can't do the old boys network the way we're
Right.
doing this. And actually 50/50 Women on Boards has done a lot of research on this, that once the board gets to more than two women on the board is when they really start to see that boost in profitability because of
Mhm,
the diverse perspectives on the board. So it's kind of an
mhm.
interesting thing to also think about. Are you going to be the first? And do you get along with all these people you're about to join the board with?
Right.
Um,
And you want to research the organization too. You want to make sure that you're not walking into a hornet's nest, is the
mhm,
other thing. Financially, are they sound?
right.
Is there a lot of litigation that's going on in that organization? Because you'll get pulled into that. So it's important that you do the research to be sure that that organization is the kind of organization that you want your reputation to be aligned with.
Because they often bring women in when things get really dicey like that because we're
Exactly.
so good at solving
Yes,
messes
you're absolutely right. But is that the mess
that you
that
want to.
you want? Yeah.
Um, so let's talk a little bit more about networking and branding, particularly branding for those that would have aspirations to be on a board, and sort of how they can communicate their value and create that brand that looks attractive to potential boards.
I think first you need to sit down and you need to reflect on the things that are most important to you so that you know for sure what the values are and who you want to go after in terms of opportunity. Oftentimes we will say yes, 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 go, go, go. And you're super, super busy, but you're not really accomplishing anything. So I think establishing who you are and what's most important to you is key. And then you build your reputation and your brand around that. Your messaging always speaks to what's most important to you when you're out with people. The old-fashioned elevator pitch, what is it that you always want to bring forward so that people know about you when they're thinking about recruiting you for an opportunity?
And I think that elevator pitch, I agree 100%. And also doing that reflective process that you talked about, you really get to what do you want?
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
I've heard this from when I was going through a job transition, and it was like, well, if you could articulate what value you bring and what you want in two sentences, everyone's like, great, I can help you. Because now
Hmm.
you're telling me how I can describe you to sell you, and also what you want, so I know
Right.
where to plug you in my
Right.
network. And people hear about, it might not even be your network that would have an opportunity. It's going to be those people's second and third level removed are the ones that
Hmm.
are going to have the opportunity. And if you have those two crisp statements, then during telephone tag, it'll translate across to that second or third tier of network.
Right.
Um, yeah. So what I always grapple with, Patricia, maybe you have some advice on this. What if you are looking for your next job role and you want a corporate board seat, like how do you manage your branding around those two things that maybe are competing?
I don't know if it's necessarily competition because again, who you are, what's most important to you has got to be fundamental in your search on both ends. Because if it's not, you end up in a place that's just for the money, which after years of being in a just for the money kind of role, you understand that at the end of the day, money is really not everything. And if you put your energies in the right places, the money will come. And people used to tell me this all the time, follow your passion and the money will come. Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, I did, and it really does work. And the peace of mind that comes with it is amazing. It doesn't mean that you don't work harder. I think I worked harder, but my why was right there front and center. And so working harder was okay because I could see the fruits of my labor and I knew what it was that I wanted. I find storytelling to be really beneficial. Perhaps there is a story that connects you to why you want to go in a certain direction. And you tell that story everywhere you go. You may modify it just a little bit, but it gets people's attention. It gets the right people's attention. And if it doesn't get the attention, that's just not the right place for you to go. It used to feel like, oh, no, nobody, that just wasn't right for you. It's okay. So I think just really, really focusing in on what brings you joy, what aligns with your values. And I think whether it's a board or whether it's a career move, I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. I'm just imagining different kinds of professionals and how they would sell that, like I'm a creative problem solver and
Right.
I want to bring those skills to any company that is trying to innovate or
Hmm.
come up with the next product or the next thing,
Right.
that's where I
Right.
want to plug in because I would be bored going to a company where it's just like keep the thing going, don't
Right,
don't rock the
exactly,
boat, like that
exactly,
wouldn't be the place for you.
exactly.
Hmm.
Innovation is key, and for me, I tell people I like to just blow it up and start all over again. So give me a whiteboard and let me just play. And
Right.
that was the value of being a CEO of a nonprofit. I could bring in my corporate experience, I could bring in my MBA training, and then I could bring in Patricia. And it's like, what can we do here? Oh, this would be great. Let's do this. And you just start building it. So you're right, the status quo, that's not a place for me. But in reality, that shouldn't be a place for anyone because I go back to Kodak is one of my favorite stories. Kodak discovered digital photography before anybody else did. And they said, oh, well, we don't want to tell anybody because we want to keep doing it the way we're doing. So we'll just keep this to ourselves. So do you see Kodak very much anymore? They could have grown exponentially in that space, but they decided, let's just keep doing it like this because this is wonderful. So we live in a world where you can't keep doing it like that anymore. You've got technology, AI, if we don't get out in front of AI, understand AI, embrace AI, because you can't fight it, it's already here. But understanding what the advantages are and how we can incorporate it into our lives, into our businesses, you've got to be innovative. It cannot be the status quo. The status quo will cease to exist. Universities that aren't offering courses that will present opportunities for employment in the new world will cease to exist. So you've got to be innovative. You've got to be looking toward technology. And I think that's one of the things that's probably changed with boards over the years because it's no longer the status quo. The stuff that you get now, I mean, gender, I mean, there's so many things that you have to know and understand and embrace and figure out how to leverage.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that you your whiteboard, your elevator speeches that you like to blow things up and put it back together better. Like that
Right,
that captures it. And some companies you'd be like, okay, no, we don't need that. So thank
right.
you.
And
But
maybe that's okay
yeah,
because I
right.
don't want to be stuck in
Keep
this
doing the
rule
same thing.
book that, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
That wouldn't be a good
Yeah.
fit. We just want a 10% improvement type of person. uh, so what steps can professionals take now to position themselves for board roles and like say the next 5 to 10 years? So they're not looking now actively, but they're looking forward. What could they do now to start thinking about that?
I think start looking at the organizations that you think you would have an interest in supporting. What missions are important to you? And look at opportunities to volunteer, look at opportunities to attend some of the events just to get to know them better, because just like candidates, what you see on the website, what you see on paper is not always the whole story. So you want to spend time to see if it's the right fit. Social groups that may be aligned with certain types of work that are important to you, I think is just a research. But I don't think it's something that you have to wait for unless you just don't have the additional time to give, because the time commitment and the financial commitment are probably the two biggest things.
Hmm. And I also, I mean, even for corporate boards, to your point about continuous learning about AI and everything, like you could start looking at what sectors get you excited to
Exactly,
look at.
exactly,
So you could even
exactly,
bring that same kind of thing to I'm fascinated by the, whatever sector, and then you just start learning as much as you can.
exactly,
We can learn so
exactly.
much now online or through the HBR articles, which I agree. I absolutely love that publication. There's other really good similar ones, and there's
Hmm.
in my world, the financial services world, there's so much research that gets published and that's freely accessible, like the Federal Reserve boards all
Absolutely.
publish
SEC, yeah, yeah,
economic stuff, and
absolutely,
you can
absolutely.
learn a lot just from just and there's other people aren't doing that. They're not
Hmm.
teaching themselves everything. So you go into conversations and you know about that sector, and then they're like, wow, you know a lot about this business sector and you're not even in it, like
Right,
that comes across, right?
right.
And so I think that's something you could do now to like figure out where you're aiming for, and then you can start networking in that direction. But
Exactly. And having
you want to head there.
conversations.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right, because when you're in it, when you're in the work, as opposed to working on the work, you don't have time to do that research and that learning. So, it's just like people say sometimes going to college, other than being a doctor or some profession like that, it really just shows that you can be trained, that you can learn. So when
Hmm.
you absorb the knowledge and then you go in and you have a conversation, it makes all the difference in the world. I'll give you an example. One of the things in my prior organization, we had a early learning center. And there were some business acumen issues in that early learning center that needed to be addressed. And so I was asked to go in. And I met with the assistant superintendent and some other people. And I told them I was an MBA grad from Hopkins. And she says, "Oh, well, that's wonderful. But what credentials do you have in education?" I was like, I can't believe she called me out in the meeting that way. And so I didn't want to put our laundry out there. So I didn't get into why I was there. I just went back and I started to really immerse myself into some of the things that were concerned to her. 6 months later, she called me. She says, I am so amazed at the way that you've absorbed the information and you've learned the industry. And then she started talking to me about stuff that happened years ago in the education space. And I said, no, no, no. Remember, I'm not an educator. I'm not an educator. So you're right. Researching the space so that you can go into the room and have a conversation uh, makes a tremendous difference. But that goes back to networking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that you can put that on paper and upload it into the black hole and yeah, and it's going to
unless
make a
you
difference.
do some speech, some speaking or writing, or then maybe you can kind of show that expertise. But it is really hard to,
Right,
if you've never done it in your job, to show
right.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
other than through conversations.
Yeah, in the volunteer space, you never know who's in the room, but even socially, you should have that same elevator pitch and that same story that you share socially. I was at some friend's house for a cookout one time, and we had just built an urban farm and fruit orchard at our center, and we added honeybees, and we had just harvested our first batch of honey, and it was just such an amazing experience. So I'm telling them about the honeybees, and we're in a food desert, and this is what we're doing. Next thing I know, I'm on a radio show with some really impressive people, all because of a story that I shared in a social setting. So having your story and sharing it, no matter who you're talking with, you just never know who's listening.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think we're at the time, Diane, right, for Q&A, if we want to open it up to that. I haven't been watching the chat, so maybe you can
Yeah.
share some questions in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with just asking who has a question now that hasn't been met. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Hi. I'm sorry I came, thanks Diane. I'm sorry I came in late and I actually have to jump off in a few minutes. So I've been dying to ask my very ignorant question because I work in the not-for-profit world and the corporate world seems very secretive to me. It's really, aside from knowing, yes, there's a corporate glass ceiling, blah, blah, blah. How, our corporate, is it pay to play? Do you have to pay to be on a corporate board? Do you get paid? Like very basic questions like that. I don't understand the mechanics of a like aside from networking and getting on the board, what, and I assumed that all corporate boards were paid until we tried to get my CEO on a board and found out that you had to put down a lot of money to be on that board. So I don't understand the basics of that. So Amy or Patricia, maybe you would have an answer to that. I would like to break that corporate glass ceiling, by the way, and get on a paid one because we serve on not-for-profits and serve a mission, by the way. So that's why I joined today. So that's my question.
I've never heard of anybody having to pay to get on a board.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the
Weight Watchers.
normal.
Weight Watchers.
Really?
Is that it's a for-profit company? That's right.
Yeah.
That's so strange. I've never heard of that.
Okay.
What I have heard is that yes, for-profit companies generally do pay. Public companies pay more, private companies pay less. But if it's a startup or anywhere, kind of from super startup to like, pre-public companies, they might not pay you. They might want to give you shares or some kind of a equity interest that might never materialize. So those are, I've heard you have to be really careful because, you might be giving your time and energy away for no reward at the end other than the fun of it, if that's what you find fun. So that's what I've heard. And then nonprofit boards, you definitely don't get paid.
Right. You have to raise money
you get
for
reimbursed for
Yes.
expenses oftentimes,
Sure.
but you don't get paid. But that's interesting dynamic that they want you to have money. Now, I think the prestige, because it looks good to have certain people on their board in terms of the corporate, the for-profit, but having to give money is.
And I don't know if that's true. That's what we heard through the back door. So this is very interesting. So I work for a health plan and we wanted to get our CEO on Weight Watchers because we provided and
It's a nice link.
It's yes, but anyway, so it was very hard to get information about that corporate board. And the person that we had doing research actually said, looks like it's, pay to play. So I don't know, but that was never confirmed by them.
And you're specifically talking about a for-profit company,
Yeah,
correct?
publicly traded, Weight
Right.
Watchers is publicly
Yeah.
traded. So.
Now, I wonder whether they want to, like, they might have a foundation or something where they are like, we want you to show your commitment to the public service that we do through a foundation. I could see maybe that, but a
Right.
private company can't just take a gift like that.
Yeah,
They
that's an interesting dynamic. I've not heard that.
But I have heard for nonprofit boards that you have to commit to
Sure.
either
Oh, yeah,
give or
absolutely.
Give or
raise
get. Give or
X
get.
typically
amount.
there's a give, get, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for
Because
letting me
nonprofits
see.
need the money.
Of course. Of course,
Right.
I
They don't
love it.
have the resources. Yeah. Yeah.
You run one.
Thank you for letting me ask the
Just to
because
just
it's
to
really
add to
important.
what because I was reading Gitanjali's statement here. I do know there are some boards where you have to make a financial pledge of some sort, even if it's a public company. And I think that's what I've come across that as well. So I think that's what Gitanjali, please write in the chat if I'm not interpreting what you said correctly. But there are a few where you have to do some kind of, maybe it's not a pay to play, so to speak, but you have to, have some skin in the game, and you're purchasing shares or, have some sort of commitment. I think that's probably what they're doing.
Right.
You have to own a certain amount of equity in the company. So that's not a give. That's a, you purchase an ownership share.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. That to me is different than making a contribution. I mean, if you're purchasing equity, you own the equity.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I can understand
It's not
that.
a country. It's not. Yeah, it's not a pay so much that you're buying share. You are a shareholder, if you will.
Right.
That
Of a certain
that
amount.
I've
Right.
heard.
Yeah.
Yes, that I have
Right.
heard of. I don't
Right.
consider that a contribution.
It's-
I consider
yeah,
that to
exactly.
be, yes, I'm so committed to the company that I want to own equity in
Mhm.
it too.
Mhm.
That makes sense to me, and
Mhm.
I've heard of that.
But Amy, do you think that there are ethical considerations buying a seat on a board, and if you're losing kind of the fairness and oversight of a board if you're buying into it, or
Well,
just skin in the game?
I think the skin in the game is a very important concept. I don't think that's unethical to say we'd want you to have a skin in the game and not. And, I think some boards, and I've seen this, where, they've got people that stay a little too long, and they kind of are nice. They're collecting their 500,000 per year to be on the public company board, and they're kind of phoning it in. And
Mhm.
unless the corporate board has really good governance, where they do like every year, every 2 years, they like look at their entire
Evaluations.
composition and say, do I really need this person's skill set anymore? And then politely exit them. If they don't have good governance around that, then, they tend to have that problem of two people staying too long. So maybe the skin in the game is a way to say, you need to have some real personal interest in the company succeeding. But you're right, it would limit your ability to recruit people that don't have $100,000 to invest in stock in this company. There many of us, I certainly wouldn't have that money. So yeah, that could be that could eliminate a large chunk of potential people, which is unfortunate.
And Patricia Roberts is asking if there are age limits on public boards.
Yes, some
Yeah.
do.
Mhm.
Some do.
Yeah, I have heard 65 in some arenas. But clearly, if you look at the makeup of some of the boards, they don't all have age requirements, because as Amy said earlier, you have some that it's probably time to move on.
The 85-year-old needs to
Right,
step
yeah,
down.
yeah, but
Right.
they do exist on boards still. But 65, I've heard, is a age limit, 65, maybe 70.
I have heard a couple things in that regard. Apparently the average age, if you look at public companies, I've heard this research, is I believe 61. The average age of current seated board members. So they, obviously there's some people much older, some people much younger. I also have heard from people who I know who have incredible experience, that weren't able to get on a board because they were told, we just aren't going to get enough years out of you because
Mhm.
you're past that point. So I would, and I've thought about that myself because I'm 61 and I'm like, well, maybe my time has passed, but I don't really think so. I think you could still try, but it might be harder because they might be looking for maybe an 8 to 10 year kind of horizon.
Mhm.
And so depending on how you come across and that you're in your network, that might be, they might not expect you to really be willing to contribute that long, and they don't want to bring you on if you're not going to be there for that time period. So it's kind of a combo. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Well, you know what? We are
Oh,
almost out of time, and we could keep going for at least another hour. Patricia and Amy, this has just been extraordinary. Would you mind each giving us, we love to close with calls to action, what you would consider the one piece of advice or call to action for women that are on this call or who will be listening to the recording afterwards to regarding this conversation?
well, I'll go first. So Patricia, you can have the last word. I would say figure out if you really like the idea of being on a board. And then if you think about that first, and then if you do, just start researching and learning as much as possible.
And I would piggyback on that because I absolutely believe that it's all about authenticity and understanding what's important to you to make sure that you're willing to expend your time in the right places. So knowing what's important to you, understanding your values, and then going after that organization that you can fully support.
Okay, this has been fabulous. Meg was not able to join. I know they've been having a lot of weather issues where she is. So, but I wanted to say just a few calls to action because we always close with that and networking, and that's part of what we do with Quorum and with the organization chief and all the organizations that our members and people on this call are part of. Volunteer for exposure and for networking and to learn as well. And also as a reminder too of what your passions are and exploring those, being creative, and also being open to learning. So I'm going to leave us with that because we're almost out of time. Thank you both so very much. This has just been a fabulous, insightful call, and I wish we had at least another hour. So thank you both. We will be having this recording that will go up online, and I'll be sending out a follow-up that lists some of these resources as well as LinkedIn ways to connect with both Patricia and Amy. So thank you all. I hope that you are enjoying the rest of the holidays and just look forward to seeing